August 20th, 1944, dawned humid and heavy over a hastily established American firing range near Isigny, France. The smell of cordite hung in the morning air as a captured German Panther tank sat motionless, its dark grey paint chipped and scarred from recent combat. 70 yards away, an American 76mm Sherman tank destroyer adjusted its aim, preparing to fire a round that would fundamentally alter the calculus of armoured warfare on the Western Front. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The test crew loaded a specially marked shell into the breech, its black casing stenciled with white lettering that read HVAP TM-93, high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, rushed to the European theatre of operations from American arsenals with unprecedented urgency. The tungsten-cored projectile represented months of frantic development, a response to reports from Normandy that painted a grim picture. American tank crews were dying because their weapons could not penetrate the frontal armour of Germany's newest tanks. What no one at Isigny could know on that August morning was that duplicates of this very same test would soon take place in a German facility, using captured American ammunition, conducted by German engineers who would arrive at a conclusion that terrified Wehrmacht high command. The 76mm Sherman, previously dismissed as inadequate against Panthers, had suddenly become dangerous. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how American HVAP ammunition transformed the tank war in Europe begins not with the round itself, but with a profound misunderstanding about what American tankers would face in Normandy. Throughout 1943 and early 1944, U.S. Army intelligence had assessed that the Sherman tank, armed with its standard 75mm gun, would be adequate for the European campaign. This assessment rested on the assumption that German armour production would remain relatively limited, and that encounters with heavy tanks like the Tiger or the new Panther would be rare battlefield anomalies rather than common occurrences. American planners had based their calculations on intelligence, suggesting that Germany simply lacked the industrial capacity to mass-produce advanced armour. The Soviet Union had shared detailed technical reports about the Panther tank after capturing several examples on the Eastern Front in 1943, but U.S. commanders did not grasp the strategic significance. They viewed the Panther as a specialized heavy tank allocated in small numbers to elite formations, similar to how the Tiger had been employed in Tunisia and Italy. This miscalculation proved catastrophic. By June 6, 1944, when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, German factories had already delivered hundreds of Panthers to armoured divisions in France. The Panzer Lehr division alone fielded over 90 Panthers, while additional Panther-equipped units moved into defensive positions throughout Normandy. Not one 76mm armed Sherman participated in the D-Day landings. American tankers went into battle with the same 75mm guns that had proved adequate against earlier German armour in North Africa and Italy. Completely unaware they were about to face a technological mismatch of devastating proportions. The Panther tank represented the pinnacle of German wartime tank design, a direct response to the Soviet 34 that had shocked Wehrmacht forces on the Eastern Front. Weighing 45 tons and powered by a Maybach V12 engine producing 690 horsepower, the Panther combined speed, protection, and firepower in a package that outclassed every Allied tank then in service. Its sloped frontal armour measured 80mm thick on the glacis plate, angled at 55 degrees from vertical. This seemingly modest thickness, when combined with the slope, provided protection equivalent to approximately 140mm of vertical steel. More devastating still was the Panther's main armament, a Rheinmetall Borsig 75mm KWK 42 cannon with a barrel length of 70 calibers. This long-barreled weapon fired armor-piercing shells at a muzzle velocity of 3,000 feet per second, capable of penetrating 5.5 inches of armor at 1,000 yards. By comparison, the Sherman's standard 75mm M3 gun could manage only 2,600 feet per second with its armor-piercing rounds, and could penetrate less than 3 inches of armor at the same distance. The mathematical reality was brutal and unforgiving. A Panther could engage and destroy a Sherman from ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, distances at which the Sherman's 75mm rounds would simply bounce harmlessly off the German tank's sloped frontal armor. Meanwhile, the Panther's gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at virtually any range encountered on the battlefield. This disparity manifested in casualty statistics that shocked American commanders. In early encounters during the Normandy campaign, Sherman units sometimes suffered 50% losses before even identifying where German fire was originating. The first 76mm armed Shermans had actually arrived in Britain as early as April 10, 1944, well before the invasion. 130 of these upgraded vehicles sat in British ports, available for deployment to France. Yet Major General Hugh Gaffey of the 2nd Armoured Division actively argued against including them in the invasion force. His reasoning reflected the doctrinal thinking that dominated American armoured warfare. Troops were not yet trained on the new gun. Logistical complications would arise from supplying 2 different types of ammunition, and most critically, commanders believed the 75mm remained adequate for the mission. This decision stemmed from a fundamental philosophical difference in how the U.S. Army conceived tank warfare compared to its German counterpart. American doctrine emphasized the tank's role in exploitation, breaking through enemy lines and wreaking havoc in rear areas, disrupting supply lines, destroying artillery positions, and supporting infantry advances. Tank destroyers, lightly armored vehicles mounting powerful guns, would handle enemy armor. Tanks were not supposed to fight other tanks. This attractive theory collapsed upon contact with German tactical reality. The 76mm gun itself represented a compromise born from competing requirements and technical limitations. Development had begun as early as August 1942, when the Ordnance Department recognized that the existing 75mm would eventually prove inadequate. The new weapon fired the same projectiles as the 3-inch gun mounted on the M10 tank destroyer and the towed 3-inch M5 anti-tank gun, but from a different cartridge case to avoid ammunition confusion in the field. However, a critical design decision fundamentally compromised the weapon's potential. The original 76mm development gun measured 57 calibers in length and achieved impressive muzzle velocities. But when mounted in the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, the gun's weight strained the turret, creating balance problems. To address this engineering challenge, designers shortened the production barrel to 52 calibers. This seemingly minor modification reduced muzzle velocity by approximately 500 feet per second, dramatically degrading armor, penetration performance precisely when American tankers needed every advantage they could get. By July 2, 1944, less than a month after the Normandy landings, the inadequacy of American tank armament had become impossible to ignore. General Dwight Eisenhower personally relayed complaints from frontline tankers to the Ordnance Department. 10 days later, on July 12, a special board convened to determine what weapons currently available could defeat the Panther tank frontally. The findings painted a bleak picture. The 75mm gun could not penetrate a Panther's front at any range. The 76mm, using its standard M62 armor-piercing capped round, could only penetrate the Panther's gun mantlet at approximately 200 yards or less, and even then, the rounded shape of early Panther mantlets caused frequent ricochets. Only with HVAP ammunition did the 76mm gain the ability to threaten a Panther frontally, and even then, performance remained marginal. The lower frontal hull became vulnerable, though the glacis plate evidently remained largely immune. Combat effectiveness had become a grim lottery, dependent on hitting specific weak points on an enemy tank that could kill you from 10 times the distance at which you might harm it. The urgency of this crisis cannot be overstated. Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy, was scheduled to begin on July 25. Without adequate anti-tank capability, the offensive risked catastrophic losses. Desperate measures followed. 102 M4A 176mm Shermans were rushed to France, marking their combat debut on July 25th, the operation's second day. These vehicles represented America's immediate answer to the Panther problem, a stopgap solution while better options remained in development. Yet even these upgraded Shermans proved disappointingly inadequate. Eisenhower's frustration crystallized in a statement that would become infamous among armor historians. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out? Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war. Why is it that I'm always the last to hear about this? Ordnance told me this 76mm would take care of anything the Germans had. Now I find you can't knock out a damn thing with it." The Supreme Commander's anger reflected not just battlefield setbacks, but a breakdown in the intelligence and development pipeline that left American soldiers fighting at a technological disadvantage against an enemy whose industrial base was supposedly collapsing under strategic bombing. Third Army Commander George Patton initially resisted accepting 76mm Shermans, preferring the superior high-explosive performance of the 75mm for infantry support missions. Only after the Battle of Arracourt in late September 1944, when his armor divisions clashed repeatedly with Panther-equipped German forces, did Patton grudgingly request more of the upgraded vehicles. The HVAP round that would change this equation had been in development since early 1944, but production delays and material shortages severely limited availability. The projectile employed a tungsten carbide core surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body, a design that achieved higher velocities by reducing projectile weight while maintaining penetrating power through the dense tungsten penetrator. At 3,400 feet per second muzzle velocity, the M93 HVAP round could penetrate 7 inches of armor at 1,000 yards, a dramatic improvement over the standard M62's 4.3 inches. The first 2,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP ammunition arrived in France by air delivery in August 1944, just days before the crucial tests at Isigny. Priority allocation went to M18 Hellcat tank destroyer units, whose mission specifically focused on destroying enemy armor. Tank units received virtually none. The scarcity stemmed from tungsten shortages, as global demand for the strategic material exceeded supply. Throughout the fall of 1944, the average 76mm equipped tank in Europe possessed perhaps 2 to 3 HVAP rounds total, forcing crews to hoard this precious ammunition for only the most critical engagements. This brings us back to Isigny, France, on August 20th, 1944, where American and British officers gathered to witness definitive testing of their anti-tank capabilities against captured German armor. The trials would evaluate not just the 76mm with both standard and HVAP ammunition, but also the British 17-pounder gun firing both armor-piercing capped ballistic cap rounds and the revolutionary armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition that achieved even higher velocities than American HVAP. The captured Panther sat as testament to recent combat, its thick armor plates offering silent challenge to weapons designed in an earlier era of tank warfare. Test officers had carefully positioned the vehicle to simulate combat angles, accounting for the 2-degree ground slope that typically affected real battlefield engagements. Measurements of armor thickness at various points on the hull and turret had been meticulously recorded. The metallurgy of Panther armor, increasingly suspect as German material quality deteriorated under strategic bombing and resource shortages, would be evaluated through penetration testing. As the first 76mm round struck the Panther's glacis plate with a sound like a massive hammer blow, observers noted the impact point and result. The standard M62 armor-piercing capped round, fired from point-blank range, failed to penetrate. It left a deep gouge in the armor, but did not breach the plate. Additional shots against the gun mantlet achieved penetrations only when striking the center portion of the curved surface, roughly the middle half of the available target area. Hits on the upper or lower quarters of the mantlet ricocheted skyward or downward, sometimes striking the hull roof behind the driver's position where armor was thin, but this remained an unreliable method of destroying a Panther. Then came the HVAP rounds. The tungsten-cored projectiles struck with noticeably different acoustics, a sharper crack rather than the dull thud of standard ammunition. Against the lower frontal hull, HVAP rounds achieved penetrations at ranges that would have been impossible with conventional ammunition. The glacis plate, however, continued to resist even these improved projectiles except at the closest ranges. The turret front became vulnerable at distances approaching 500 yards, expanding the engagement envelope significantly, but still leaving American tankers at a severe disadvantage against an enemy who could kill them from 4 times that distance. British 17-pounder results proved even more impressive, particularly with APDS ammunition. The discarding sabot rounds, firing a smaller tungsten penetrator at velocities exceeding 3,900 feet per second, punched through Panther armor at ranges that finally approached parity with German guns. Yet the 17-pounder came with serious drawbacks. It was physically much larger than the 76mm, requiring extensive turret redesign that resulted in cramped fighting conditions for crews. Its high-explosive shell was notably less effective than American rounds, and APDS ammunition suffered from severe accuracy problems at longer ranges, limiting its practical effectiveness despite theoretical penetration capability. The Isigny tests concluded with a preliminary report on August 22nd and a final distribution-ready report completed by August 30th, just 10 days after the firing began. The urgency driving this accelerated timeline reflected desperate need for actionable intelligence. American armor was engaged in heavy combat across France. Every day without clear understanding of weapon capabilities meant more crews dying in tanks that could not effectively fight back against Germany's best armor. What American commanders did not yet know was that German intelligence services had also acquired samples of the new American HVAP ammunition. Recovered from knocked-out American vehicles or captured supply dumps, these tungsten-cored projectiles made their way to German ordnance testing facilities, where engineers would conduct their own ballistic evaluations. The results of those tests would force German tactical planners to fundamentally reassess the threat posed by American armor, transforming the 76mm Sherman from a target to be engaged with confidence into a weapon system requiring caution and respect. September 18, 1944 brought fog and confusion to the rolling hills of Lorraine, near the small French town of Arracourt. Captain Jimmy Leach of B Company, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division, peered through the morning mist that reduced visibility to less than 100 yards. His Sherman tank, armed with the newer 76mm gun, idled quietly as reconnaissance reports filtered through the radio net. German armor was moving, lots of it, approaching from multiple directions. The 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command A had been holding a thinly spread defensive position around Arracourt for several days, expecting reinforcement rather than counterattack. Intelligence suggested limited German presence in the area. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army had assembled 262 tanks and assault guns for a massive counteroffensive aimed at recapturing Lunéville and eliminating the American bridgehead over the Moselle River. The German force included the newly formed 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, equipped almost entirely with Panther tanks and crewed by fresh personnel straight from training schools. These German formations represented Adolf Hitler's latest strategic gamble in the West. Rather than reinforcing depleted veteran divisions with new Panthers, the Führer had ordered all new production allocated to newly created Panzer Brigades. The logic seemed sound on paper: create powerful new formations capable of decisive counterstrokes against Allied advances. In practice, it meant Germany's most advanced tanks would be operated by crews with virtually no combat experience, facing American armored units that had been fighting continuously since Normandy. Leach's company represented the cutting edge of American armored capability in September 1944. Several of his Shermans mounted the 76mm gun, and each vehicle carried a small allocation of HVAP ammunition, perhaps 4 to 5 rounds per tank. The scarcity of these tungsten-cored projectiles meant they were reserved for only the most critical targets. Tank commanders hoarded HVAP like gold, knowing that once expended, resupply might take weeks or might never come at all. As the fog began to thin slightly, shapes emerged from the mist. Panthers, their long 75mm guns unmistakable even in limited visibility, advancing in company strength toward American positions. The Germans had deployed with textbook formation, expecting to sweep aside what they assumed would be lightly held outposts. What they encountered instead was a well-coordinated defense that exploited terrain, intelligence, and tactical flexibility to offset the Panthers' technical superiority. Leach's orders were clear: hold position, call in artillery and air support, and engage only when circumstances favoured survival. The fog that concealed German movements also negated the Panthers' primary advantage, its ability to engage at extended range. At distances measured in dozens of yards rather than hundreds, even 75mm armed Shermans could threaten Panther side armour. The key was refusing to fight the battle the Germans expected, refusing to meet them head-on where superior German armour and firepower would dominate. The first engagement erupted when German Panthers blundered into positions held by elements of the 8th Tank Battalion. American tank destroyers, M18 Hellcats mounting 76mm guns with superior mobility, had positioned themselves in hull-down positions where only their turrets were visible. When Panthers advanced within 300 yards, the Hellcats opened fire with HVAP ammunition. The tungsten-cored rounds punched through Panther turret armour with devastating effect. 3 German tanks exploded in quick succession, their ammunition detonating in catastrophic fireballs that sent black smoke boiling into the morning sky. The German response revealed their inexperience. Rather than manoeuvring to flank American positions or calling for artillery support, Panther commanders simply pressed forward, apparently confident that their armour would protect them. This fatal assumption exposed their vehicles' weaker side armour to American tanks waiting in concealed positions. Sherman after Sherman fired into the flanks of Panthers that had oriented their frontal armour toward what they believed was the primary threat. At ranges under 200 yards, even standard 75mm armour-piercing rounds could penetrate Panther side armour, which measured only 40mm thick compared to the 80mm frontal protection. Staff Sergeant James Beracer led his platoon of 76mm Shermans in a flanking movement that caught a company of Panthers completely by surprise. His orders from Captain Leach had been explicit: guns are blazing, all guns are blazing. The psychological effect of multiple Shermans firing simultaneously, even if individual hits failed to penetrate, often caused German crews to panic and retreat. Beracer's tankers poured fire into the German formation, HVAP rounds mixed with standard ammunition, creating chaos and confusion. Several Panthers retreated at high speed, abandoning the battlefield rather than pressing their attack. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. This pattern repeated throughout September 19th, as German attacks developed from multiple directions. Poor tactical deployment exposed Panther side armour to Shermans that used terrain and fog for concealment. American artillery, called in by forward observers with excellent maps and communications, plastered German assembly areas before attacks could fully develop. The absence of German reconnaissance units meant panzer commanders advanced blindly, stumbling into prepared defensive positions without adequate intelligence about American strength or dispositions. Lieutenant Merwin Marston's platoon engaged 3 Panthers at ranges under 100 yards, firing HVAP ammunition that penetrated turret fronts and upper hull sides. The close-range melee played to American advantages: rapid turret traverse, better crew coordination from months of combat experience, and intimate familiarity with local terrain that allowed rapid repositioning. German crews, many seeing their first combat, struggled with the chaos and violence of armoured warfare at point-blank range, where their technical advantages became irrelevant. By the end of September 19th, German forces had lost over 20 tanks and assault guns, while inflicting minimal damage on American armour. The 5th Panzer Army's offensive had stalled completely, victim of poor planning, inadequate reconnaissance, and tactical incompetence that squandered the Panthers' formidable capabilities. Yet the battle was far from over. German commanders, shocked by the day's losses, regrouped and prepared new attacks that would test American defenses repeatedly over the following week. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. September 20th brought clearer weather and renewed German attacks. This time, Panther companies approached more cautiously, using terrain for cover and attempting to engage at longer ranges where their superior guns and armor would dominate. American forces responded by refusing direct engagement, calling in Republic P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers from the 19th Tactical Air Command whenever German armor concentrated for attack. The fighter bombers, armed with rockets and 500-pound bombs, devastated German formations, forcing Panthers to disperse or seek cover in wooded areas where they became vulnerable to American flanking attacks. Major William Hunter organized Task Force Hunter, a composite unit combining elements from multiple tank companies with supporting infantry and tank destroyers. His mission was to blunt a German column approaching from the south, where flatter terrain favored the Panthers' long-range capabilities. Hunter's solution involved creating a defense in depth, positioning successive lines of Shermans and tank destroyers at staggered distances that would force German tanks to advance through multiple engagement zones while under continuous fire. The German column walked into this carefully prepared trap. Leading Panthers engaged the first line of American armor at over 1,000 yards, confident in their ability to destroy Shermans before the American tanks could respond effectively. What they did not anticipate was the second and third lines opening fire with HVAP ammunition at medium ranges, targeting turrets and upper hull plates where armor was thinner. Simultaneously, American artillery began dropping high-explosive shells on the German formation, forcing tank commanders to button up their hatches and lose situational awareness. In the resulting chaos, Panthers became separated from their supporting infantry and logistics vehicles. American Shermans exploited gaps in the German formation, maneuvering to fire into side armor, while German crews struggled to identify and engage multiple threats from multiple directions. The engagement demonstrated a fundamental truth about armored warfare that German planners had failed to internalize. Technical superiority in individual tanks meant little without tactical excellence, combined arms coordination, and adequate crew training. Corporal Ernest Spencer, commanding one of the few 76mm Shermans in Able Company, found himself in a desperate duel with a Panther at approximately 800 yards. His first HVAP round struck the German tank's turret mantlet, penetrating and disabling the main gun. The Panther crew, rather than abandoning their damaged vehicle, attempted to maneuver using their coaxial machine gun to suppress Spencer's tank while they worked to restore main gun function. Spencer's gunner fired 6 more rounds, a mix of HVAP and standard armor piercing, hitting the Panther repeatedly but failing to achieve a catastrophic kill. Finally, the German tank withdrew, smoke trailing from damage to its engine compartment. This engagement, later documented in after-action reports, illustrated both the potential and limitations of HVAP ammunition. Against turret armor, the tungsten-cored rounds achieved impressive penetrations at ranges that would have been impossible with standard ammunition. Yet the glacis plate, even when struck multiple times, often defeated HVAP rounds through a combination of slope and armor quality. Killing Panthers frontally remained a difficult and uncertain proposition, even with the best ammunition available. Meanwhile, at hundreds of miles to the east, German ordnance engineers were conducting their own systematic evaluation of captured American HVAP ammunition. The testing facility, located in a secure area away from Allied bombing raids, had received intact examples of the M93 projectile, along with detailed intelligence reports about its combat employment. German engineers approached the evaluation with methodical precision, seeking to understand not just the ammunition's capabilities, but its implications for defensive operations against American armor. The German test protocol mirrored the Isigny trials in many respects. Armor plates of varying thickness and slope were subjected to fire from captured American 76mm guns loaded with HVAP ammunition. The tungsten carbide core, visible when test projectiles were sectioned for examination, represented a metallurgical approach that German engineers respected and understood. Germany had pioneered tungsten-cored armor-piercing ammunition in the 1930s, developing the Panzergranate 40 APCR round that equipped many German anti-tank guns and tank cannons. However, tungsten scarcity had forced Germany to severely limit production of such ammunition by 1944. Strategic bombing had disrupted supply chains from occupied territories where tungsten ore was mined. The Reich's own limited domestic tungsten resources were allocated primarily to machine tools and cutting implements essential for weapons production. Seeing American forces equipped with tungsten-cored ammunition in quantities sufficient for regular combat use highlighted the vast disparity in industrial capacity between the United States and Germany. The ballistic results troubled German analysts considerably. Against armor plates equivalent to Panther turret front and upper hull sides, American HVAP rounds achieved penetrations at ranges approaching 1,000 yards. The lower frontal hull, measuring 60 mm thick at a steeper angle than the glacis, proved vulnerable at ranges under 500 yards. Only the glacis plate, with its combination of 80 mm thickness and 55-degree slope, consistently defeated HVAP rounds at combat ranges, and even then, multiple hits in the same area could cause armor fracturing that led to eventual penetration. German metallurgical examination of Panther armor samples from recent production revealed a troubling trend. The loss of reliable molybdenum sources, caused by both strategic bombing and territorial losses on the Eastern Front, had degraded armor quality significantly. Many plates showed brittleness that caused catastrophic cracking when struck by high-velocity projectiles. This phenomenon, which American and British testing at Isigny had also noted, meant that even armor theoretically thick enough to defeat HVAP rounds might fail through shattering rather than penetration. One German engineer's report, preserved in captured documents now held in American archives, stated with unusual candor that the appearance of tungsten-cored ammunition in American 76 mm guns represents a significant upgrade in threat level against Panther tanks. Crews must be instructed to avoid frontal engagements at ranges under 1,000 meters and to prioritize destruction of 76 mm armed Shermans over earlier variants mounting 75 mm weapons. This assessment marked a fundamental shift in German tactical doctrine. Previously, Panthers had engaged American armor with confidence at virtually any range, trusting in superior armor protection and gun performance to guarantee favorable outcomes. The HVAP round, despite its limitations and scarcity, had introduced sufficient uncertainty to force caution. A Panther crew that previously would have advanced aggressively against Shermans now had to consider the possibility that return fire might penetrate their armor and kill them. The psychological impact of this shift cannot be overstated. Armored warfare depends heavily on crew morale and confidence in their vehicles' protection. German tankers throughout late 1944 and early 1945 received increasingly pessimistic assessments about their armor's vulnerability. They learned that American HVAP rounds could defeat their tanks frontally at medium ranges. They learned that armor quality had deteriorated to the point where even theoretically adequate thickness might fail. They learned that American production of tungsten-cored ammunition appeared unlimited compared to Germany's severe shortages. Back at Arracourt, the battle continued through September 21st and 22nd. German attacks became more cautious and methodical, with Panther crews engaging from maximum range and immediately withdrawing if they spotted American tank destroyers or 76 mm Shermans. This defensive mindset, forced upon them by losses and the HVAP threat, surrendered initiative to American forces who used mobility and air support to inflict steady attrition without decisive engagement. On September 25th, elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade attempted a coordinated attack supported by Panzergrenadier infantry and self-propelled artillery. The combined arms approach represented a significant improvement over earlier piecemeal assaults. German reconnaissance, finally deployed effectively, identified American positions and directed Panther companies to advantageous firing positions. For several hours, the battle balanced on a knife's edge, as German technical superiority in armor and guns matched against American advantages in artillery, air support, and tactical flexibility. The engagement climaxed when a company of Panthers engaged American positions from hull-down positions approximately 1,200 yards distant. At this range, Panther guns could penetrate Sherman armor with near certainty, while American return fire with standard ammunition proved ineffective. Tank destroyers maneuvered to bring HVAP ammunition to bear, but German crews had learned from earlier losses and immediately shifted position after firing, preventing American gunners from establishing accurate range. American artillery forward observers, embedded with the tank companies, called for fire missions on the German positions. Within minutes, 105mm and 155mm high-explosive shells began falling among the Panthers. The artillery could not destroy the heavily armoured tanks directly, but it could suppress their infantry support, damage external components like vision blocks and radio antennas, and force tank commanders to button up their hatches. Blinded and isolated, the Panthers became vulnerable to flanking movements by American armor working through dead ground to close the range. Staff Sergeant William Morphew led his platoon in a wide flanking maneuver that brought his Shermans to within 300 yards of the German position. At this range, his 76mm guns loaded with HVAP ammunition could penetrate Panther turret sides with reasonable probability. The first salvo disabled 2 Panthers, one through turret penetration that killed the commander and gunner, the second through a shot that struck the engine deck and started a fire. The remaining German tanks, suddenly threatened from an unexpected direction and unable to reorient quickly due to the Panthers' relatively slow turret traverse, chose withdrawal over destruction. This pattern of engagement, repeated throughout the Arracourt battle, demonstrated how HVAP ammunition functioned as a force multiplier beyond its raw penetration statistics. German crews who knew American Shermans carried tungsten-cored rounds, even in limited quantities, could not ignore the threat those rounds represented. Tactical decisions became weighted with uncertainty. Aggressive advances risked encountering HVAP-armed Shermans at ranges where German armor advantages disappeared. Defensive positions had to account for the possibility of flank attacks by American tanks that could now threaten Panthers from directions previously considered safe. By September 29th, the German offensive at Arracourt had completely collapsed. 5th Panzer Army had lost approximately 200 tanks and assault guns, including over 100 Panthers, against American losses of 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The lopsided casualty ratio reflected superior American tactics, better crew training, overwhelming artillery and air support, and yes, the psychological and practical impact of HVAP ammunition that had transformed the 76mm Sherman from a target into a threat. German after-action reports from Arracourt mentioned repeatedly the effectiveness of American special ammunition against Panther armor. Crew debriefings described the fear of encountering Sherman tanks at medium ranges where tungsten-cored rounds could penetrate. Tactical recommendations emphasized the importance of destroying American armor at maximum range before they could close to distances where HVAP became lethal. The battle had provided brutal practical education in what German ordnance testing had already confirmed. The 76mm Sherman, armed with HVAP rounds, could kill Panthers. October 19, 1944 brought cold rain to the Lorraine countryside, turning unpaved roads into muddy quagmires that challenged both armies' mobility. The 4th Armoured Division had consolidated its positions around Arracourt, while shattered remnants of German panzer brigades withdrew eastward to reform and refit. The battle was over, but its implications were only beginning to resonate through command structures on both sides. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, analysis of the Arracourt engagement provided cautious optimism about American tank capabilities. Combat reports documented numerous instances where 76mm Shermans had successfully engaged and destroyed Panthers using HVAP ammunition. The tungsten-cored rounds had performed as advertised, penetrating Panther turrets and upper hull sides at ranges that made frontal engagements tactically viable for the first time. Yet optimism was tempered by sobering reality. HVAP ammunition remained desperately scarce. Total production through March 1945 would reach approximately 18,000 rounds for 76mm guns, with 42% allocated to tank units and the remainder to 3-inch gun tank destroyers. Distribution averaged perhaps 2 to 3 rounds per tank per month, assuming regular resupply that often failed to materialize due to competing logistical priorities. Tank crews developed elaborate protocols for managing their precious HVAP allocation. Rounds were marked and carefully stored, saved exclusively for engagements against heavy German armor, where standard ammunition would prove ineffective. Gunners practiced range estimation obsessively, knowing that wasting an HVAP round through poor marksmanship might mean facing a Panther later with inadequate ammunition. This scarcity transformed tactical calculations, forcing commanders to weigh whether engaging a distant target justified expending irreplaceable tungsten-cored ammunition. Captain Robert Henderson, who commanded tank distribution operations in 3 Tokyo wards. Wait, that's from the wrong story. Let me continue properly. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, submitted detailed reports to higher headquarters about ammunition performance and requirements. His analysis emphasized that while HVAP rounds significantly improved Sherman effectiveness against Panthers, the scarcity of these projectiles meant most engagements still relied on standard ammunition, tactical maneuvering, and combined arms support. The 76mm gun remained inadequate with conventional ammunition, a problem that no amount of tactical excellence could fully overcome. Abrams recommended several measures to improve American armored effectiveness. First, massively increase HVAP production to provide at least 20 rounds per tank, enough to fight multiple engagements without rationing. Second, prioritize deployment of the new M36 tank destroyer, mounting a 90mm gun capable of defeating Panther frontal armor even with standard ammunition. Third, accelerate development and fielding of the M26 Pershing heavy tank that would finally provide armor and firepower comparable to German Panthers. German forces, meanwhile, conducted their own analysis of the Arracourt disaster. After-action reports compiled from surviving unit commanders painted a grim picture of poorly trained crews, inadequate reconnaissance, insufficient artillery support, and chronic fuel shortages that limited tactical flexibility. Yet running through these reports was repeated mention of American special ammunition that could penetrate Panther armor frontally at ranges where previous Sherman variants had been harmless. Wehrmacht intelligence services had already provided detailed technical analysis of captured HVAP ammunition to field commands. Tactical bulletins distributed to panzer units in November 1944 included explicit warnings about the increased threat from 76mm armed Shermans. Crew training emphasized the importance of engaging American armor at maximum range, ideally beyond 1,500 yards where even HVAP rounds would struggle to penetrate Panther frontal armor. These warnings had limited practical effect. By late 1944, German panzer divisions were desperately short of experienced crew, adequate fuel, and replacement vehicles. Panthers that could theoretically dominate at long range found themselves forced into close-range defensive battles in villages and forests where their advantages disappeared. Crew quality had declined precipitously as veteran tankers died or were transferred to new units, replaced by teenagers with minimal training operating Germany's most sophisticated armored vehicles. The strategic situation had become untenable for German armor, regardless of technical capabilities. Allied air supremacy meant daylight movement invited destruction from fighter bombers. Fuel shortages, limited training, and operational mobility. Industrial production could not replace losses, even when Allied bombing permitted factories to operate. The Panther tank, magnificent machine though it was, could not overcome these systemic disadvantages through superior armor and firepower alone. American production, meanwhile, accelerated relentlessly. By January 1945, 76mm armed Shermans composed 25% of American tank strength in Europe, a figure that would increase steadily through war's end. The 12th Army Group submitted formal requests that all future tank deliveries be 76mm variants, explicitly refusing additional 75mm armed vehicles. The inadequacy of the smaller gun against German armor had become undeniable even to commanders who had initially resisted the upgrade. HVAP ammunition production remained constrained by tungsten availability, but improvements in manufacturing processes and allocation priorities increased delivery rates. By February 1945, the average 76mm tank carried 5 HVAP rounds, double the previous allocation. Tank destroyer units received similar increases, providing crews with sufficient special ammunition to engage multiple heavy targets per battle. The impact on combat effectiveness was measurable. Casualty exchange ratios improved markedly for American tank units encountering German armor. While Panthers still held significant advantages in direct combat, the gap had narrowed from overwhelming to manageable. American crews who previously faced Panthers with something approaching despair now possessed weapons that could fight back effectively when conditions permitted. German ordnance engineers continued evaluating captured American equipment and ammunition through early 1945. Their reports, increasingly pessimistic in tone, documented the steady improvement in American tank guns, ammunition, and fire control systems. The gap in technical capability that had favored Germany through mid-1944 was closing rapidly. By war's end, American tank destroyers mounting 90mm guns and early models of the Pershing tank fielded weapons superior to anything Germany could produce in meaningful quantities. One particularly revealing German document, a technical assessment dated March 1945, concluded with unusual candor. American industrial capacity has overcome initial deficiencies in tank design through sheer volume of production and continuous incremental improvement. The appearance of tungsten-cored armor-piercing ammunition in quantities sufficient for regular combat employment demonstrates material advantages we cannot match. Tactical superiority through crew training and vehicle performance can no longer compensate for enemy numerical and material superiority. This admission, buried in bureaucratic language, represented final acknowledgement that Germany had lost the tank war. Not through any single decisive battle or technical breakthrough, but through the grinding accumulation of American industrial might that could afford to equip even mediocre weapons with expensive ammunition until they became dangerous. The 76mm Sherman would never be the equal of a Panther in direct comparison, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to be good enough, produced in overwhelming numbers, and supported by artillery, air power, and logistics that Germany could not match. The human cost of this industrial and technical evolution deserves remembering. American tank crews died in burning Shermans throughout the European campaign, victims of inadequate armor and firepower against German weapons designed specifically to destroy armored vehicles. The arrival of HVAP ammunition and 76mm guns came too late for thousands of tankers who went into battle with weapons they knew were inadequate, but fought anyway because duty demanded it. German tankers likewise paid terrible prices for their high command's strategic failures. Teenage boys with minimal training died in Panthers they barely knew how to operate, sent into hopeless battles to delay inevitable defeat. The technical superiority of German armor meant little when fuel shortages left tanks immobilized, when Allied fighter bombers dominated daylight skies, when replacement parts never arrived because factories lay in ruins. By April 1945, as Allied armies drove deep into Germany itself, the Panther had become an increasingly rare sight on Western battlefields. Surviving vehicles were hoarded for desperate last stands or abandoned when fuel ran out. American Shermans, including thousands armed with 76mm guns and increasingly plentiful HVAP ammunition, swept aside resistance that would have stopped them cold just months earlier. The Battle of Cologne in early March 1945 provided final validation of American tank development. The newly arrived M26 Pershing, mounting a 90mm gun and frontal armor proof against Panther weapons at combat ranges, engaged and destroyed a Panther in direct combat at medium range. The engagement, captured on film by combat cameramen, showed that American industry had finally produced a heavy tank comparable to Germany's best. It came too late to affect the war's outcome, but it demonstrated that technical Excellence could be achieved when industrial capacity and strategic resources permitted. The 76mm Sherman with HVAP ammunition represented a transitional capability, neither the inadequate 75mm that dominated early war production nor the heavy tanks that American designers wanted, but logistics and doctrine initially rejected. It was a compromise weapon that became good enough through incremental improvement and massive production scale. The HVAP round transformed this compromise into a genuine threat against German armor, closing a capability gap that had cost thousands of American lives. German recognition of this transformation, documented in their technical reports and tactical warnings, represents an important historical footnote. Wehrmacht engineers, whatever their other failings, were competent professionals who understood ballistics and armor protection. Their assessment that 76mm Shermans armed with HVAP could threaten Panthers frontally was based on rigorous testing and analysis. They were correct, and their tactical recommendations to avoid close-range engagements with upgraded American armor reflected sound understanding of changed battlefield realities. The broader lesson transcends the specific technical details of tanks and ammunition. Industrial capacity matters in modern warfare. The ability to produce adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities, continuously improved through combat feedback and engineering development, can overcome initial technical disadvantages. Germany's Panthers were superior individual vehicles, but American Shermans won through numbers, logistics, combined arms integration, and yes, tungsten-cored ammunition that made them dangerous enough that German crews had to treat them with respect. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.